Welcome to SBC 103B, which is a course code for protection agencies and community relations. Still talking about Unit 4 that seeks to talk about protection agencies and community relations. And in this session, we will learn about sources of conflict between the protection agencies and the public. You will recall that there has been some instances where the police, military, and other members of the protection agencies have clashed with the youth groups in their communities. And I believe that this time you might have remembered some instances you personally witnessed or saw on television. And you are to come out with all these ones when we start the discussion, and it promises to be interesting as it has always been. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to identify the sources of conflict between the protection agencies and the public. You should be able to explain the sources of conflict between the protection agencies and the public. Yeah, so in understanding sources of conflict between the protection agencies and the public, there are certain sources that we will need to consider. And the first thing is there is a lack of general understanding about the functions of the various protection agencies. So for the public, they do not understand why alleged criminals walk free when they are handed over to the police for crimes they have committed. Citizens who arrest such criminals and hand them over to the police usually do not understand that the state must prove the guilt of the alleged criminals beyond all reasonable doubt, and therefore the police would need their cooperation. This sometimes generates a lot of suspicion in the minds of the public and could create conflict between the police and the public. There were instances where the mob arrests a thief and they fortunately did not lynch him or her, but handed him or her to the police. However, after they wrote their witness statement, nobody followed it up to give the police any assistance in order for them to prosecute the alleged thief. So after waiting for a while without any of the people showing up, the alleged thief is then released because keeping the person in cells without trial would amount to abuse of his or her fundamental human rights. And as you've been told, the maximum hours somebody should be in cells is 48 hours. You can attest that under such a situation, when members of the community find the person walking freely around the community, they will easily suspect the police for probably compromising their integrity to get the alleged criminal released. Interesting, isn't it? Yeah. And the second thing that we talk about is to have both the citizens and the protection agencies having problems with trust. The protection agencies do not trust the citizens and vice versa. The protection agencies view the citizens as disrespectful, while the citizens also view the protection agencies as inefficient and corrupt. This is a potential source of conflict between the citizens and the protection agencies. We often see this play out during protests and demonstrations where the police use minimum force on the protester. And as such situation, when it results into some injuries, we often hear the police essentially saying the protesters were disregarding their institutions, not to veer off the approved routes. On the other hand, we often hear the organizers of the protesters accusing the police of being incompetent and doing the bidding of government in power. This lack of consensus over such issues is not right, and it generates lack of trust between the police and the public. I believe you get it. The other source of conflict is having differences in perception on how crimes occur and how they're supposed to be dealt with, as well as who is a criminal and who is not. It is common for people to explain that persons who have been arrested or killed as an armed robber was a decent person who lived in the neighborhood with them. They would usually say he was a gentleman and could not therefore commit such crime. However, it is difficult to say who an armed robber is by looking at the shape of his face and how he or she relates with the community in which he or she lives. Sometimes the citizens are vindicated, and other occasions the police are able to prove that such people were indeed criminals. For instance, none of the neighborhoods of Atai even knew or believed that he was or could be a notorious armed robber who had been in police wanted list for so long. He indeed confessed in an interview from the Ankafo prisons that the name of the police used was not his original name and no one knew him by that name. He was also a very nice person in the community, so no one ever suspected him. And I believe there are other examples that vindicates the citizenry. A handy example was the killing of young men from Asmasi, which happens to be a suburb of Kumasi, which turned out to be a panic reaction from the police. The reports of the committee proving beyond every reasonable doubt that the young men were indeed not armed robbers. It must not have happened. However, it should be noted that there are other cases which remain unresolved. The actual truth has not been established till date. And I believe you understand that. Finally, intolerance on the part of the protection agencies often generates conflicts. Some protection agencies are so intolerant that they do not take kindly of being questioned by citizens on the reason for their conduct. They often see such questions from citizens as a challenge on their authority. The mere verbal exchange or physical resistance of questionable acts by the police could escalate tension and hostilities. Sometimes the police could threaten to deal with such citizens. They could sometimes deliberately delay their vehicles to let such citizens know that the police have sufficient power at their disposal. Actions such as these make it difficult for citizens to even know the reasons for their arrest and some police actions against them. For all you know, the above points are not exhaustive, and you are encouraged to identify additional issues that could have served as a conflict between protection agencies and the citizens. I believe you've learned a lot, isn't it? Any question? Okay. We have been thinking through an interesting things about the areas of contention between the police and the public. These are usually the causes of conflict between the protection agencies and the public. And the key issue that we discuss has to do with the knowledge gap that exists in the minds of the public on how crime are supposed to be handled or addressed. This gap can partly be blamed on poor civic education and is largely for suspicion that characterize the relationship between the public and protection agencies is the main source of conflict between the groups in Ghana. And I believe you have learned a lot. Join me as we talk about the use of discretion in our subsequent sessions. And until we meet for that lecture, bye for now. Thank you for your time.